The courtroom froze when Lily's German Shepherd growled at the officer's sworn testimony. Everyone laughed, until Lily stood up and said, "I can prove it." What happened next shattered the entire courtroom. But let's start from the beginning. The courtroom of Greenville County was packed to the brim that morning, and it wasn't just the usual courtroom regulars filling the pews. Word had gotten out. There was something different about this case. Something raw, emotional, unsettling. Reporters lined the back walls, whispering into their recorders. Elderly couples clutching coffee cups leaned forward on worn benches, their brows furrowed in anticipation. Mothers, teachers, and local activists watched, eyes sharp, every breath in the room held taut like a wire about to snap. 12-year-old Lily Preston sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, her small frame dwarfed not only by the heavy oak furniture, but by the oppressive weight of the moment itself. Her hand clutched the thick leash of her German Shepherd, Scout, whose muscular body sat coiled beside her chair, ears alert, nose twitching. The giant dog was a living wall of silent strength between Lily and the world that, today, seemed eager to doubt her. Across the aisle sat Vernon Clay, the towering school security officer whose imposing figure dominated his side of the courtroom. His gray uniform, pressed to perfection, gleamed under the cold fluorescent lights. His badge caught the occasional glint as he shifted in his chair, his face carefully arranged into an expression of wounded dignity. He wasn't just defending himself, he was defending the institution, the very idea that authority should be trusted over a child's broken body. The judge, Harold Simmons, perched on the bench like a weary old vulture. His drooping eyes and perpetual scowl gave away more than he intended. He tapped his pen absently against a yellow legal pad, as though impatient for the proceedings to move along and confirm the decision he, perhaps, had already made in his mind. As Mr. Clay's defense attorney, a slick, silver-haired man named Douglas Finch, launched into his opening statement, Lily's mother, Marcy Preston, dabbed at her eyes with a crumpled tissue. She sat hunched beside her daughter, hands twisting in her lap. Every word from Finch's mouth, about Officer Clay's valiant efforts to prevent a disturbed child from harming herself and others, landed like tiny daggers into Marcy's heart. She could feel the judgment radiating from the gallery, could almost hear the unspoken words. Poor man, trying to help a troubled kid. Why are they dragging him through this? But they didn't know. They didn't see what Lily had seen. They hadn't heard the sickening crack when Clay shoved her against the lockers, hadn't seen the flash of hatred in his eyes. They didn't know that it wasn't protection. It was punishment. And they certainly didn't know about Scout. Lily sat motionless as the lies spilled forth. Finch painted her as unstable, volatile, prone to outbursts, a child whose unfortunate background made her desperate for attention. She heard the soft murmurs of agreement ripple through the courtroom. Even the judge seemed to lean back a little more comfortably, as if settling into a story he'd heard 1,000 times before. But Lily wasn't just a scared little girl. She had prepared for this. Scout had prepared for this. As Finch's voice droned on, Lily gave the subtlest flick of her wrist, a signal she had practiced 100 times under blankets at home, whispering into Scout's ear while the nightmares raged. A movement so small, so natural that even the keenest observer might have thought it a nervous tick. Scout responded immediately. The German Shepherd's body stiffened, muscles rippling under his glossy coat. His eyes, which had been scanning the room, snapped to Officer Clay with laser focus. His upper lip quivered just slightly, exposing the glint of white teeth. Then came the growl. Low, resonant, vibrating through the wooden floorboards like a distant thunderclap. The room stilled. Even Finch faltered mid-sentence. Even Judge Simmons paused his pen tapping. "Control your animal, Miss Preston," the judge barked, his tone carrying more irritation than concern. Lily's hands shook, but she rose to her feet. Every instinct screamed at her to stay seated, to stay invisible, but she forced herself upright, planting her sneakers firmly on the floor. "Scout is a certified PTSD support dog," she said, her voice quivering but loud enough to carry to every corner of the room. "He's trained to detect stress, deception, and danger." There was a ripple of laughter from the gallery, dismissive, mocking. A few people openly shook their heads, exchanging looks of pity or scorn. Some even chuckled under their breath, as if amused by the absurdity of a child thinking her dog could challenge the testimony of a decorated officer. Even Judge Simmons allowed a smirk to tug at the corner of his mouth, the condescension unmistakable. He opened his mouth, no doubt to deliver a stern warning about courtroom decorum. But Lily wasn't done. "I can prove it," she said, her voice suddenly clear, slicing through the sneers and mutters like a blade through silk. For a beat, there was only silence. A heavy, waiting silence. Finch scoffed audibly, turning to the judge. "Your Honor, I must object." The judge raised a hand, silencing him. His face, though still skeptical, showed a flicker of something else now. Curiosity. "Proceed," he said, almost lazily. "But be warned, Miss Preston. This courtroom is not a stage for theatrics." Lily nodded. She knew the risk. She knew what would happen if she failed. They would think she was delusional, that her trauma had made her unstable. They would side with Clay, and he would walk free, ready to hurt someone else. She turned to Scout, knelt beside him, and whispered, so quietly that only he could hear, "Stay strong, boy. They have to see." The German shepherd's tail gave one solid thump against the floor, as if to say, "I'm ready." Lily stood and faced the courtroom. "I'll speak a series of statements," she announced. "Scout will react. If I tell the truth, he'll remain calm. If I lie, he'll growl." There was another round of murmuring, more skepticism, but Judge Simmons leaned forward now, his elbows resting heavily on the bench, hands steepled beneath his chin. "Very well," he said. "You may begin." Taking a deep breath, Lily steadied her voice. "My name is Lily Preston." Scout remained still, his brown eyes soft and attentive. "I am 12 years old." No reaction. "I love broccoli more than chocolate." Scout let out a low, suspicious grumble. Laughter erupted again, lighter this time, tinged with reluctant amusement. Lily cracked the barest smile. "Good," she thought. "Let them laugh. Let them drop their guard." She continued. "I sometimes sneak an extra hour of video games after bedtime." Scout gave a tiny, playful woof. The judge's mouth twitched. Then Lily turned to Officer Clay. She pointed a trembling finger straight at him, locking eyes with the man who had turned her life into a nightmare. "Officer Clay claims he grabbed me to protect me from harming myself," she said. Scout's body tensed so hard that his hackles rose, his teeth bared fully now, and the growl he emitted was no longer low. It was deep, threatening, primal. The courtroom gasped audibly. Murmurs turned to frantic whispering. Someone dropped a pen with a sharp clatter that echoed off the stone walls. Judge Simmons's face changed. The smirk vanished. The laziness evaporated. In its place was something grim, calculating. He banged his gavel once, sharp and loud. "Order!" he barked. He turned to Finch, then to Officer Clay, his eyes narrowing. "I think," the judge said, voice dangerously low, "we need to take a much closer look at the evidence." And for the first time since Lily had walked into that courtroom, she felt the tide shift. Just a little, but enough. Scout leaned into her leg, solid and warm, a silent promise that he would not leave her side. Not now, not ever. And Lily Preston, 12 years old, just maybe, had taken the first step toward the truth. Judge Simmons tapped his gavel sharply, the sound cracking through the heavy air like a starter pistol. His face remained impassive, but something had changed. A small but significant shift in his posture, a flicker of genuine attention in his aging eyes. "Order," he said, his voice heavier now, slower. "Let's humor this experiment." The word experiment dripped with condescension, a lifeline tossed with reluctance. Still, the gallery leaned forward, eager for whatever spectacle might unfold. Across the aisle, Mr. Clay leaned back in his chair, his arms folded in an exaggerated display of ease. His lips curled into a faint smirk, the kind of expression you might wear when indulging a child's fantasy. His amusement was palpable and dangerous. Lily took a shaky breath, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Every pair of eyes in the room bore into her, some mocking, some pitying, but none believing. Except one. Scout shifted beside her, his thick fur brushing against her leg like a whisper of encouragement. Lily tightened her grip on the leash, not to control him, but to steady herself. "I'll ask Scout to listen to everything I say," she announced, forcing her voice to be louder than the pounding of her heart. "If I tell the truth, he'll stay calm. If I lie, he'll growl." There was a beat of silence, a collective intake of breath. Judge Simmons nodded slowly, his mouth a tight line of skepticism. "Proceed," he said. Lily swallowed the lump in her throat and stepped into the center of the courtroom, the leash coiled loosely in her hand. Scout padded beside her, calm but alert, his tail low but relaxed, his massive head swinging back and forth as he scanned the tense faces around them. Facing the gallery, Lily began. "My name is Lily Preston," she said clearly. Scout sat like a statue, ears perked but utterly relaxed. His tongue even lolled out a little, a picture of canine serenity. Soft murmurs rippled through the room, perhaps surprised at the dog's lack of reaction, perhaps simply waiting for the inevitable failure they were certain would come. "I go to Westfield Middle School." Again, no reaction. Scout blinked lazily, his tail giving a single, absent-minded thump against the polished floor. Lily could feel the faintest stirring in the room now, curiosity beginning to nibble at the edges of doubt. She took a tiny, steadying breath. "I once broke my mom's favorite lamp and blamed it on the wind," she admitted, cheeks reddening. The reaction was instant. Scout's ears flattened slightly. His body stiffened, and a low, unmistakable rumble emerged from deep within his chest. It wasn't aggressive, but it was real. The courtroom gasped in unison. A few people actually jumped in their seats. Several reporters furiously scribbled notes. Judge Simmons's posture straightened noticeably, his pen forgotten on the desk. And then, just as quickly, Scout settled again when Lily remained silent, his body language calm and unthreatening. The effect was electrifying. Suddenly, the courtroom wasn't dismissive anymore. It was quiet, watchful, waiting. Feeling the shift, Lily pressed on. "I am bad at math," she confessed, earning another playful grumble from Scout and a scattering of nervous chuckles. The judge tapped his pen once, sharply. "Get to the point, Miss Preston," he said. His voice was no longer weary. It was tight with tension. Lily turned. Slowly, deliberately, she pivoted on the balls of her feet and faced Vernon Clay. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Mr. Clay, still smirking, arched an eyebrow, as if daring her to continue. Lily lifted her chin. "Officer Clay said I was fighting with another student," she stated, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger with each word. Scout stiffened again. His body tensed like a drawn bow. His tail froze. His lips curled back just enough to expose the pearly white tips of his fangs. A low, menacing growl filled the courtroom, the kind of sound that sliced through nerves like a knife. Several people recoiled instinctively. A woman in the gallery clapped her hand over her mouth, but Lily wasn't finished. "He said he grabbed me to stop me from hurting someone," she continued. Scout's growl deepened, rumbling like thunder rolling across the plains before a storm. The tension in the room snapped tight as piano wire. "And," Lily finished, her voice breaking only slightly, "he said I hit him first." The growl turned into a quiet snarl, so low and guttural that even the judge leaned back slightly in his chair. It was no coincidence. No nervous behavior. No chance misunderstanding. The room felt it, the dog's primal, unwavering instinct screaming through every taut muscle and fierce stare. Lie, lie, lie. The defense attorney, Douglas Finch, leapt from his seat, his face turning crimson. "Objection!" he shouted, his voice cracking with a mixture of outrage and panic. "Your Honor, this is absurd. This is emotional manipulation. A circus trick." Judge Simmons didn't even look at him. "Enough!" the judge barked, his voice carrying the sharpness of a whip crack. Finch sputtered, still trying to speak, but the judge silenced him with a glare so fierce it seemed to physically shove the words back down his throat. Slowly, Judge Simmons turned his attention back to Officer Clay, and something changed in his eyes. The lazy indifference was gone. The casual authority, the assumption that truth would always align with the powerful, evaporated. In its place was something colder, harder, a dangerous thing. He leaned forward, elbows on the bench, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "I think," the judge said, each word measured and deliberate, "it's time we heard Officer Clay's account. Again, under very close scrutiny." The room, which had already been silent, seemed to draw in even tighter, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Mr. Clay's smirk faltered. Just slightly, but it was enough. Lily saw it. The jury saw it. And perhaps, most importantly, the judge saw it. Finch tried to recover, whispering urgently to his client, but Clay only nodded stiffly, as if suddenly realizing that the floor beneath him had become very, very fragile. Judge Simmons continued, his voice colder still. "Miss Preston's demonstration, though unconventional," he said, glancing meaningfully at Scout, "raises sufficient doubt as to the credibility of prior testimony." He rapped his gavel once. "We will reconvene after a brief recess. Officer Clay, I strongly suggest you review your previous statements." With that, the judge stood and exited the bench, his black robes flaring like the wings of a vulture taking flight. The gallery erupted into a low murmur, buzzing like a disturbed hive. Scout relaxed immediately, his body language returning to neutral. He turned his great head and nudged Lily's hand with his nose, an almost tender gesture. "You were amazing," Marcy whispered, tears glistening in her eyes as she squeezed her daughter's hand. Lily didn't answer. She simply leaned down, wrapping her arms around Scout's thick neck, burying her face in his fur. For the first time since the incident in the school hallway, she allowed herself to believe, just a little, that maybe, just maybe, the truth was winning. But deep inside, she knew the fight wasn't over yet. Because men like Vernon Clay didn't fold easily, and power, once challenged, had a nasty habit of fighting back. The real battle, Lily realized, was just beginning. When the court resumed after recess, the energy in the room had changed entirely. Gone was the smug amusement that had once rippled through the gallery. Gone was the blind deference that had shielded Officer Vernon Clay in his uniformed armor. In its place was a heavy, waiting silence, thick with suspicion, ripe with expectation. Judge Simmons returned to his seat with a grim expression, tapping the gavel once to bring the room to order. He leaned forward, hands clasped before him, staring down at Officer Clay with a look that could strip paint. "Officer Clay," he said slowly, "you are to answer all questions clearly and directly. No evasions, no embellishments. Am I understood?" Clay nodded stiffly, his face pale but set. The prosecutor, a wiry, sharp-eyed woman named Karen Bowers, rose from her seat. She held a stack of papers in one hand, but she hardly glanced at them. She didn't need notes. Today, she smelled blood. "Officer Clay," Bowers began, her voice deceptively mild, "you testified earlier that you witnessed Miss Preston engaging in a physical altercation with another student, correct?" "Yes," Clay answered, his voice low, guarded. "And that you intervened to prevent harm?" "Yes." "And that the physical force you used was necessary?" "Yes." Bowers smiled tightly. Not a smile of warmth, but a predator's smile. "Let's review the footage again, shall we?" The courtroom lights dimmed and the monitors flickered to life. The familiar hallway appeared, long, tiled, mostly empty. There, in the center of the frame, was Lily. Small, slight, her arms wrapped tightly around a pile of books. No other student, no fight, only Lily. Then, from the side, Officer Clay stormed into the frame, his movements sharp, aggressive. Without warning, he reached for Lily's arm, jerking her backward so hard that her books scattered across the floor. Lily stumbled, almost falling. The sheer force of the grab was visible even on the grainy footage. A collective gasp shuddered through the courtroom. Scout, lying obediently at Lily's feet, let out a low, vibrating growl, barely audible but unmistakable in the tense silence. Bowers let the video run a few more seconds, then froze the frame. Lily cringing, Officer Clay looming. She turned slowly back to him. "Where is the altercation you described?" she asked softly. Clay shifted uncomfortably in his chair. There was a scuffle just before that," he said quickly. "Off camera." Bowers raised an eyebrow. "You're saying the fight occurred conveniently outside of view?" "Yes," Clay said, but his voice cracked just slightly. "And yet," she clicked her remote. A second angle flickered onto the screen, a different hallway camera showing a broader view. No scuffle, no other students, just Lily, and Officer Clay, closing the distance like a storm. Murmurs swelled through the gallery. A woman in the back shook her head, her mouth a thin, angry line. Judge Simmons rapped his gavel once, but this time it sounded half-hearted. Even he could feel the tide rising. Bowers stepped closer to the witness stand, her voice tightening. "You claimed Lily Preston struck you. Where in this footage does that occur?" Clay opened his mouth, then closed it again. He started. Bowers pounced. "You see, Officer Clay, we now have two pieces of footage, neither showing any threat from this 12-year-old child. Would you care to explain the discrepancy?" Sweat dotted Clay's forehead. It happened faster than the camera caught." Lily sat rigid, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Scout pressed against her leg reassuringly. Bowers circled like a hawk. "And when you detained Miss Preston, you filed a report, did you not?" "Yes." "In that report, you stated, under oath, that she exhibited violent behavior, justified the use of force, and required restraint to prevent escalation." "Yes." Bowers snapped her fingers, and an assistant handed her a document. She waved it lightly. "But what you didn't mention," she said, voice like a scalpel, "was that your colleague, Officer Ramirez, had a body cam recording, one he forgot to deactivate." The gallery leaned forward en masse. The video began to play. At first, it was shaky. Officer Ramirez chatting idly as he strolled down the hall. Then, distantly, came the sounds of raised voices. Ramirez's camera panned toward the noise, and then, chillingly clear, Clay's voice. "These little punks need to learn who's boss." Followed by the loud thud of books hitting the ground, followed by Lily's yelp of pain. A collective intake of breath swept the courtroom like a wave. On the monitor, Ramirez hurried toward the scene, but by the time he arrived, Clay had Lily pinned against the lockers. The video ended. Silence crashed into the room like a hammer. Scout, sensing the tension had reached its peak, finally relaxed fully at Lily's side. His tail thumped twice against the floor. Not a warning now, but a quiet victory. The jury sat stone-faced. Their expressions ranged from disgust to cold fury. Even those who had started the trial, sympathetic to Officer Clay, now looked at him as if he were something rotten. The gallery, once filled with whispers of doubt against Lily, now seethed with barely suppressed outrage. Judge Simmons' face turned an alarming shade of red. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the bench. He leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "You lied to this court," he hissed at Clay. "You abused your authority, and you dared to victimize this child." Clay said nothing. He stared down at the desk, his face slack with shock, as if realizing too late that the walls he thought would protect him were crumbling to dust. Marcy Preston sobbed openly now, clutching Lily's hand so tightly it hurt. Tears streamed down her face, not just tears of grief, but of relief, of vindication, of long-awaited justice. Lily squeezed her mother's hand back, her own eyes glistening but defiant. She wasn't a helpless child anymore. Not today. Not here. Judge Simmons straightened with effort, tapping his gavel once, twice, 3 times. "We will recess for 30 minutes, he said sharply, "after which we will proceed with sentencing recommendations." He glared at Clay one last time. "And Officer Clay," the judge added, his voice heavy with finality, "you may want to consider obtaining legal counsel." The bailiffs moved toward Clay's side of the courtroom. He flinched. A small, involuntary movement that betrayed the collapse of his bravado. As the room slowly emptied for the recess, people cast glances back at Lily. But these were no longer looks of pity. They were looks of admiration, respect. The child they had once dismissed as fragile had exposed a predator. And she had done it with courage, with truth, and with the quiet power of a dog who could see what they could not. Scout nudged her hand again, and Lily bent to hug him tightly, burying her face against his warm fur. She had done it. They had done it. But somewhere deep inside she knew. The fight for justice wasn't over yet. It had only just begun. Judge Simmons's ruling was swift and merciless. Officer Clay was immediately placed under arrest for perjury and assault. The jury awarded Lily's family a sizable settlement for damages and trauma, but more importantly, her name was cleared, her voice was heard. As bailiffs escorted Clay out in handcuffs, the courtroom erupted into stunned whispers. The judge, voice softer now, addressed Lily directly. "You reminded us all today that the truth has its own way of making itself known. Sometimes, it just needs a little help." Lily hugged Scout tightly, burying her face in his thick fur. Outside the courthouse, news crews flocked to interview them. Lily, normally shy, stood tall and said only one thing: "Never underestimate the quiet ones." And somewhere in that crowd, the hundreds watching live and the thousands who would later see her story online, found a piece of hope they didn't know they had been missing. Because sometimes, even in a world that favors the strong and the loud, the truth still wins, carried not by power, but by courage, and by a German shepherd who knew exactly when to growl.